text. In Part 3, Section 396, Leibniz writes, "I maintain that all the souls, entelechies or primitive forces, substantial forms, simple substances, or monads, whatever name one may apply to them, can neither spring up naturally nor perish." Well, what appears to be a lack of discussion of the monadology may indeed be a question of name. Even though monads play almost no role in the discussion, simple substances come up with more frequency in the text. But even then, there isn't much genuinely substantial discussion that would lead one to attribute monadological metaphysics to Leibniz in that text. He comes close to the monadological metaphysics in the preliminary discourse, section 10, where he writes, "The system of pre-established harmony shows that there are of necessity substances which are simple and without extension, scattered throughout all nature, that these substances must subsist independently of every other except God, and that they are never wholly separated from organic body." But this is consistent with the corporeal substance view, on which there are indeed substances simple and without extension scattered throughout nature, attached to organic bodies as their souls, which together with them make up the corporeal substances that constitute the ultimate constituents of the world on the corporeal substance metaphysics. In some other passages, Leibniz treats souls and simple substances as being of a piece, apparently arguing for key properties of souls by virtue of the fact that souls are simple substances. And so in Part 1, Section 65-66, he argues that what is true of the soul is true of, quote, all simple substances scattered throughout nature, that they are spontaneous, that there's no true causal connection among them, etc. Later he adds that they, quote, cannot begin except by creation, nor end except by annihilation. That they have perception and that their individuality is defined by a perpetual law. That every simple substance, quote, embraces the whole universe in its confused perceptions or sensations. Now, none of these passages entail what it is that I've called the monadology proper, the view that ultimately the only true substances are non-extended and mind-like. All of these passages are consistent with the view that souls and simple substances are substances among others, some of which are not souls or simple substances. The only passage I could find that is unambiguously monadological is a brief remark tucked in at the end of a longer sentence. Quote, and I see not why there should be less objection to making some atoms of Epicurus or of Cassendi endure, than to affirming the subsistence of all true, simple, and indivisible substances, which are the soul and true atoms of nature. Now that is unambiguously the monadological doctrine. But it's just a remark made in passing that can easily be passed over by the inattentive reader who is focused on more on the theology than on the metaphysics, and I admit that it took a number of readings before I found that those few words at the end of a sentence. Now, when Leibniz composed the Monadology 4 years later in 1714, and it's worth pointing out here that monadology was not Leibniz's name for it. For that matter, we don't really know what Leibniz's name for it was, if he actually even had a name for it. But that's the way the text, the monadology, has been named by later commentators. When he composed the Monadology 4 years later, in 1714, in one draft he included specific references to the Essai de Theodicy, keying certain sections of the Monadology to specific texts in his recently published book. Now, this might suggest that he thought that the two texts were closely linked, or at least that the Monadology is present in the Essai de Theodicy, perhaps as the statue of Hercules may be hidden in the veins of a piece of marble, to use Leibniz's own image from another context. But when we look carefully at the references that he makes in the Monadology and trace them back to the Essai de Theodicy, the result is somewhat disappointing. It's true that a great many of the theses propounded in the Monadology are indeed found in the Essai de Theodicy, but almost all are either general features that are true of the soul, such as the fact that the simple substances are spontaneous, or they're general features of Leibniz's metaphysics. For example, the centrality of the principle of sufficient reason or of contradiction. The opening section of the Monadology, where Leibniz suggests, but doesn't yet assert, that the world is made up of monads. The monad which we shall discuss here is nothing but a simple substance that enters into composites, etc., is key to section 10 of the preliminary discourse, which I quoted earlier. But as I noted earlier, that section is completely consistent with corporeal substance metaphysics. At the time he was composing the Essai de Theodicy, Leibniz certainly believed in a world of monads, no question about it. But it wouldn't have been possible to infer this if the only thing that you had to go on was the Essai de Theodicy. What little discussion there is of monads and simple substance in the Essai de Theodicy seems rather indirect and marginal to the main argument. If all you had to go on was Leibniz's published writings at this point, it would be very difficult to guess that the ultimate constituents of Leibniz's world were non-extended spiritual substances. And indeed, Ramond has real trouble figuring out what Leibniz is up to. Now, one might ask, why didn't Leibniz take this opportunity to present his metaphysical thoughts to the public in this, his first full-scale philosophical book? This is particularly puzzling for those who see the Monadology, as Leibniz's central project and is very closely connected to the project of the Essai de Theodicy. And one such commentator is Don Rutherford. In his now classic book, Leibniz and the Rational Order of Nature, Don begins the introduction of his book by remarking that a significant weakness of many modern studies of the philosophy of Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz has been the negligible role that they've assigned to the project of theodicy. We have all but forgotten that the only philosophical book Leibniz published during his life was the Essays on Theodicy. And so, he argues, in what follows, I hope to make progress in recovering the theodicy as an essential part of Leibniz's philosophy. And in a very general way, Don then goes on to show how various features of the Monadology are connected with what he takes to be the basic claim of the Essai de Theodicy, that God created the best of all possible worlds. Don's perspective on the relation between the Monadology and the Theodicy program, between the Monadology and the Essai de Theodicy, has recently been endorsed wholeheartedly by Antonio Lamara in a very interesting essay, La pensée monadologique de Leibniz dans les Essais de Theodicy, that was published in a collection recently published and edited by Paul Rateau. Whereas Rutherford is less concerned with the details of the text of the Essai de Theodicy, Lamara offers an interesting textual analysis of Leibniz's 1710 book. And, I will admit that I, in writing this essay, found that enormously helpful. While he admits that the monadological metaphysics can't be represented as being the thematic center of the Essai de Theodicy, nevertheless, he does say it's very much present there and could be considered as one of the constitutive elements in its theoretic horizon. This is Lamara. Now, if, like Don and Lamara, one thinks that the Monadology and the Theodicy projects are closely connected, then it should be a pressing question to understand why the Monadology isn't more present in the Essai de Theodicy than it is. Lamar explains the relative lack of attention to the monadology